My name is Wes Simmons. I'm the CEO of a company called 3D Institute. We exist really to help coaches develop strategies in all three dimensions of an athlete's being to fulfill what we call their transformational purpose for their body, their mind, and their spirit. We live in a society that's just drawn to sports. It's the number one thing that we really do when it comes to discretionary activities. It's the number one thing we watch on the internet. It's the number one thing we participate in. It's something like over 60 million kids playing sports in our culture, and it's discretionary. There's no rule that says you have to play sport, but people are drawn to that. And I think it's because really, if you think about it, sport is very much like it's like life condensed down. There's a beginning, there's an end, there's a set of relationships, there's a cause, there's highs and lows. And I think people are just drawn to that. And what an opportunity we have in this thing called sport to help people learn lessons in life that go beyond just the X's and O's. That's what we do in three-dimensional coaching. We try to help people really think about the why behind the X's and O's. And then we try to help coaches really develop strategies to engage their athletes, not just physically, but also mentally, and also engage their hearts. Sport has changed fundamentally really over the past 20 years. And the things that I had to experience as a kid are completely different than what kids are experiencing today. You go back a couple of generations ago and you didn't have to coach a kid's heart. You could just be what we call a level 1 coach only, which means that really the only thing you really have to deal with is the physical aspect of their being. And that was enough. I mean, kids were signing up for your program, first and foremost, just to get bigger and better and faster and stronger, to get better at the sport. Kids are coming into our programs today with so little margin in their lives that we tell coaches, if you don't coach their heart now, they'll quit on you. And we see that. It's about 72% of kids are quitting at the age of 12. This phenomenon called 12-year-old burnout, that didn't exist when I was a kid. It's a relatively new phenomenon. And I think it's because we're subjecting kids to so much competition at such early ages that it really begins to have a profound effect on what we would call third dimension attributes of their heart, and not always positive. Things like identity and character and significance, self-worth, value, and purpose. If coaches aren't intentional about coaching those things, then the sport world will coach it for you. And the idea is that kids will begin to ascertain that their identity and their purpose and their significance is all based on what they do, not based on who they are. And we want to help coaches train up a generation to untether their identity from their performance, because we have a performance-based identity as a culture in so many aspects, and sport is so formative in our lives that if we're not intentional about it, it actually amplifies those effects in a negative way. But if we're intentional about it, it's an incredible opportunity to really pass on those life lessons and shape kids' identity in a healthy way. We like to tell coaches, you dare not be a tour guide to a land you haven't traveled. This is your journey first. This is your journey, our journey as coaches into our heart first. And the 3D journey really starts with the heart of the coach. And we really want to help coaches define what we call their transformational purpose. What is the why behind the X's and O's? Once that foundation of purpose is in place, then what 3D does is it gives you a simple framework to develop strategies to engage the athlete in all dimensions of their being. The first dimension is the physical. About 75 to 80% of coaches from experience, and also according to our research, are what we call first dimension only. And what that means is for most coaches, if you were to go around and chart everything they deliberately coached or taught for a week, for a season, for a year, it would always fall into the category of the physical. Things like strength, power, cardiovascular, speed, quickness, agility, tactics, repetition, the X's and O's stuff. But we all know that there's more to the athlete than just the physical. There's also this mind of the athlete. We call that the second dimension. And our research and experience shows that only about 15 to 20% of coaches have a clearly articulated strategy for the second dimension. That they're just as intentional about things like motivating from within or instilling confidence or have a strategy to deal with emotions. Have really thought through their plan to forge team cohesion in a me-centered generation. Know how to cultivate goal setting in a healthy way. Those are all second dimension issues, and most coaches don't have strategies for those. And when we don't have strategies for second or third dimension issues, what we try to do is, what we normally do as coaches is that we coach them in the first dimension. For example, team cohesion, which is relational. Either we're going to get along or we're going to run. Very common. That kind of thinking that when we don't know how to address these issues, we just punish them in the first dimension or try to apply a cardiovascular strategy to relational issues. It doesn't work. It doesn't work in marriages. It doesn't work in any other domain of life, really, but for some reason, that's what we do in sport. So the second dimension is very important. That's the social, emotional, relational stuff. But that third dimension is the heart. And that's that deeper executive center of the being. That's that place in us that determines our self-worth, our identity, our purpose, our significance, our character. And we know the sport world affects that in a major way. And if coaches aren't intentional about coaching those, it gets coached for them. And it always gets coached in the first dimension. So the journey to coaching an athlete's heart for a coach needs to start with their own heart first. And that's clearly articulating and defining their why, their transformational purpose. Then what 3D provides is a simple framework that empowers us to categorize our thoughts. Therefore, once we can have a new vocabulary, we can begin to be more intentional about developing the strategies to engage athletes at all three dimensions of their being. We are three-dimensional beings. To not coach an athlete in all three dimensions, by very definition, is to not get the best out of them, let alone fulfill our purpose as coaches. But 3D is a framework that really just applies to humanity. What drives me every single day is the fact that one coach will impact more people in 1 year than the average person does in a lifetime. Because of the power of the coaching platform, we know that if a coach can be intentional about defining the why and then developing strategies for all three dimensions, their legacy will be tremendous because just of the sheer number of people that they have the opportunity to impact, but also with the power they possess, that impact can be felt and remembered for a lifetime. We'd like to remind coaches the two most powerful words in the English language are coach says. Coach says. Great power, though, requires great character for that to be a blessing and not a curse. And coaches need to always remember, you never know what's going to stick. It's about being intentional, about using this platform you have to transform lives for good. April 22nd, 1998 was an incredibly beautiful spring day, one that I'll never forget. It was like a postcard. It was like one of those postcards you buy on vacation and you mail home to all your friends and family to make them feel jealous about where you're at. And I was in Northwest Missouri after a long, cold winter, and it was the first day that spring really popped. I mean, you could really smell spring in the air. You could feel the sunshine hot on your face, and life was good. And I remember that I went over to a buddy's house. It was a Wednesday night. We didn't have class the next day, and we were just hanging out. And I had every intention just to hang out as long as the night went on, because I was 19, didn't have a care in the world. But as the sun went down on that day, the only way that I can describe it is that the sun went down on my soul. And it was about the stroke of midnight that I received a phone call. That phone call that every family member dreads to get. It was my dad. And he went on to tell me that my older brother, Jason, who was 22 years old, had earlier been in a head-on car crash. And the issue wasn't would he live or would he die? Barring some kind of miracle, that fate seemed sealed. As I drove home on that 4-lane highway, trying to make it to the hospital before he died, all kinds of thoughts and just waves of emotions and questions were just running through my brain. And here's the question that haunted me most. What was I going to say to him? Probably for the last time. As I rushed into that cold, sterile hospital room, I really wasn't prepared for what I was about to see. I went in there, and there Jason laid, and he was, I don't want to give you all the graphic details. He'd gone through the windshield, so it didn't even really look like him. And I still didn't know what to say to him, so I just grabbed his hand. That's when it hit me. That's when reality came crashing into my soul, because I recognized that hand. 3 things came out that night. And if I could rewind the tape, I'd say these 3 things again. The first thing I said to him was not goodbye, but that I would see him again. I held to that hope. I continue to hold to that hope. The second thing I told him was that I loved him. Regretfully, that may have been the only time in my life with any real intentionality that I told him that, where Mom didn't make me say it. And the third thing I did was, on his deathbed, I committed the great cause of my life to him, at least in that moment, which sport was everything to me. And so I promised Jason on his deathbed that we'd win the national championship in 1998 in his memory. Seems kind of trivial now, but it was huge at the time, and it really meant something. The reason I share that story is because he died that night, and I remember, 3 or 4 days later at the funeral, just busload after busload of teammates, coaches, teammates' families, coaches' families, athletic trainers, support staff, all these people that never knew my brother and knew me casually at best. They showed up. And I will forever be grateful that I found myself under the care of what I would consider to be a 3-dimensional coach who used his positional power to create this environment where relationships flourished. And as those people showed up, man, they rallied around that cause. And I was able to find healing for my soul because I had a community that I could go back to. I had a family at home. But if I didn't have a community to go back to, that probably would have been the end of my college career. I don't know if I could have faced it. The other reason I share that is because, a couple days later at the funeral, what became very profound as a memory over time was that what matters at the end of life are really 2 things. And I call them the funeral topics. What do people talk about at funerals? Relationships and the cause. The transcendent cause. The cause that the person who died gave their life to that was bigger than themselves. And when relationships and cause come together, powerful things happen. That's exactly what happened with our football team, who rallied around that cause. And yeah, we had some good athletes on that team, but there's something about that adversity that brought us together, and we went on and we won that national championship in 1998. And that was a great gift of healing. Mostly, though, that's a constant reminder that the most powerful motivational force in the entire universe is love. It's love. And what we're trying to do in 3-dimensional coaching is to help coaches to be intentional about harnessing the most powerful motivational force in the universe as they seek to motivate athletes. And that's the power of love.